All right, let's dive into one of the most dramatic, chaotic, and honestly most important transformations in American history. We're talking about a time of insane growth, of staggering, unbelievable wealth, and the massive conflicts that came right along with it. This is the story of the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, a period that literally forged the America we live in today.
Okay, just to set the stage, take a look at this. On the left, that's the U.S. railroad system in 1860. I mean, it's there, but it's pretty sparse, right? Now look at the right. That's just 30 years later, 1890. Whoa, it's like a spiderweb covering the entire country. The nation was literally stitched together by iron and steel. And this wasn't just about making travel easier. This was about creating one single gigantic national market, moving resources at incredible speeds and fueling an industrial boom like nothing the world had ever seen.
So this incredible explosion of growth didn't just happen by accident. See, the Civil War had forced northern industries to get incredibly efficient. And after the war, that momentum collided with a perfect storm of other factors, and the whole thing just took off, turning the U.S. into an industrial powerhouse that completely reshaped the nation.
So what was the recipe for this economic explosion? Well, there were a few key ingredients. First up, America was sitting on a treasure trove of natural resources. Oil, iron, you name it. Second, the government was basically giving businesses a giant green light. And third, you had this constantly growing population, full of immigrants arriving every day who provided both the workers and the customers for all these new products. You throw in some game-changing technology, like the Bessemer process that made steel cheap and easy to make, and boom, it was inevitable.
And the big idea driving all of this was capitalism. The economist Adam Smith described this system where individuals, not the government, are in the driver's seat. They control the money and the businesses. And the force that guides everything, he called it the invisible hand of competition. The belief was that this force would guide the economy way better than any government rule ever could.
But here's the thing. The famous author Mark Twain, who actually came up with the name The Gilded Age, knew that a shiny surface can hide some pretty ugly stuff underneath. You know, gilded means it's covered in a thin layer of gold. On the outside, this era looked like all progress and wealth, but if you scratched that shiny surface, well, underneath there was a lot of poverty, corruption, and exploitation.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Let's hear from someone who actually lived it. This is Clara Lemlich, a garment worker. She talks about bosses screaming at workers, terrible lighting, and conditions so filthy that she says unsanitary just isn't a strong enough word. Her story was the story from millions of people who were paying the real price for all this new industrial wealth.
So what about the guys at the very top of this system? You know, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. Were they heroes or were they villains? Well, it really depends on who you ask. On one hand, people called them robber barons, saying they got rich by crushing their rivals, exploiting workers, and basically stealing from the public. But on the other hand, plenty of people saw them as captains of industry, visionaries who built America, created jobs, and made the U.S. an economic superpower. The truth, as always, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
To really get a feel for the conflict, you gotta understand the conditions. And this one number, it says so much. 85. That was the standard work week at one of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills. Let that sink in. That's over 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing backbreaking, incredibly dangerous work.
What's really fascinating is how this whole conflict turned into this organized battle, with like specific weapons and tactics on each side. So on the labor side, you had your classic moves, strikes, boycotts, that kind of thing. But then, look at management's arsenal. They could blacklist you so no one else would hire you. They could use a lockout and literally lock you out of the factory. It was an all-out war.
And this industrial war got ugly. It came to a head in violent showdowns like the infamous Homestead strike. Carnegie's manager cut wages, the union went on strike, and so the manager hired a private army, the Pinkertons, to break them. What followed was a deadly, day-long battle. Eventually, the governor sent in the state militia and the strike was brutally crushed. It was this stark, terrifying lesson in the combined power of big corporations and the government.
But you can only push people so far, right? The pressure just kept building and building. The inequality and the injustice got so extreme that new movements started popping up all over the country. And they weren't just asking for a raise, they were demanding fundamental changes to the whole American system. One of the first and loudest voices came from America's heartland. Farmers felt like they were getting absolutely crushed, squeezed by debt, and totally ripped off by the powerful railroads that had a stranglehold on getting their crops to market. Feeling completely powerless, they did something radical. They organized their own powerful third political party, the Populist Party.
And that frustration was perfectly captured in one of the most famous speeches in all of American history. A politician named William Jennings Bryan basically argued that the country's obsession with the gold standard, tying all money to a fixed amount of gold, was suffocating regular people. His Cross of Gold speech turned an economic debate into this epic moral crusade for the soul of the nation.
At the very same time, a totally new kind of journalist was emerging. Teddy Roosevelt called them muckrakers because he said they were always raking up the muck and filth of society. And they wore that name like a badge of honor. They were investigative reporters who dove deep into the shadows of this gilded world to show everyone the corruption hiding right under the surface. And their impact was incredible. I mean, look at this. You have Jacob Riis using his camera to literally bring the shocking poverty of New York slums into the living rooms of the wealthy. You have Ida Tarbell, who spent years documenting every ruthless move Standard Oil made to build its monopoly. And then, oh man, Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle and reveals the absolutely horrifying, disgusting conditions in the meatpacking industry. They didn't just report stories, they forced the public to see the truth. And you know what? It worked. The public outcry from all this, from the farmers, the workers, the people reading these muckraking articles, it got so loud that the government just couldn't ignore it anymore. This kicked off a whole new period we now call the Progressive Era, a time focused on reform and on totally rethinking what the government's job should be. And leading the charge right from the White House was the man himself, President Theodore Roosevelt. He promised every American a square deal. Basically, he said he would use the power of the government to balance things out between big business, workers, and the public. He went after monopolies. They called it trust busting. He fought for laws to make sure our food and medicine were safe. And he became a huge champion for conservation, protecting massive areas of America's wilderness. You can draw a straight line from the pages of a muckraker's book to laws that still protect us right now. When the public read about what was really in their sausage in The Jungle, the outrage was so huge that Congress was forced to pass both the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act that same year. It's a perfect example of public awareness forcing real change. But this wasn't just about a few laws. This era fundamentally changed the U.S. Constitution itself. Think about it. 4 amendments were passed in just 7 years. The 16th gave us the federal income tax. The 17th let the people directly elect their senators. The 18th banned alcohol, which, okay, that one didn't last. And the 19th, finally, gave women the right to vote. Every single one of these was a massive shift of power in America. And the push for reform didn't stop there. It continued right on under President Woodrow Wilson. He came in and strengthened the laws against monopolies. He created the Federal Trade Commission to act as a watchdog against shady business practices. And, maybe most importantly, he established the Federal Reserve System to finally bring some stability to the nation's banks. So when you boil it all down, the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era didn't just build a new economy. They forged a brand new debate, a question that we are still trying to answer today. What is the government's proper role? How do you balance the freedom for businesses to grow with fairness for workers and protection for the public? That question was born in the factories and slums over a century ago, and honestly, we're still wrestling with it every single day.